Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. In this video, we're going to talk about weapon-mounted light techniques for the handgun. There are a lot, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are some choices when it comes to weapon-mounted lights. For this video, I will only be discussing two weapon-mounted lights because they're the only two that I consider to be duty grade based on my experience, the lights I see in classes, the lights I've seen in my career, my profession. So if your light doesn't fall in that category, obviously you can address that on a personal level based on the techniques, because the techniques only differ in degree by the activation of the light itself. So we'll be talking about the TRL type light from Streamlight, and of course Surefire's X300 Ultra series. This is an A model, but of course the B model, the only difference is the attachment method. The switch remains the same. Now, if you remember from the All the Lumens video, I talked basically about my philosophy with the application of light. I want as much light possible because light is going to be used, artificial light is going to be used to replace natural daylight. The reason for that is I need as much data as I can get, and the brighter the light, generally speaking, especially when it has really good candela, the more control I'm able to exhibit over a person at longer distances. When it comes to a handgun, handguns don't have the same range, generally speaking, that a rifle is going to have, but we still need to be able to project as much light as possible. So there is no minimum, or I should say maximum lumen count that I would be okay with on a handgun. As long as you're using proper light techniques, which is something we're going to address in this video, you should be able to run 600, 800, 1,000 lumens on a handgun without any issues whatsoever. The biggest point of contention when it comes to the manipulation of weapon lights is separating administrative type lighting techniques from direct contact type lighting techniques. I'm going to use the light in a different way if I'm using it in a searching method than I'm going to use it when I'm actually confronting a threat. The most popular method for just general searching, some people want to use the word administrative when it comes to searching. I would consider searching to be administrative. If I have the firearm out, then I have a reasonable expectation that I may need it, or I'm going to need it in the near future. So nothing I'm doing with the firearm, the handgun out, I would consider administrative while I'm using the light in an environment where I feel like I should have the handgun out. So I would consider there to be a threat or presence of unknown individuals, things of that nature. So I'm not going to use the word administrative because I don't believe any of the lighting techniques are going to be administrative in nature. But one of the techniques that is popular that comes up is using strobing to navigate. Here's the thing about navigation. You are diurnal by nature, which means you are a daytime predator. Your eyes are not specifically designed or attuned for nighttime use. This is something we talked about in the All the Lumens video. Because of that, we have a natural desire to want to see everything, or use light to see everything, even if we don't necessarily need the light, especially when it comes to navigation. If I'm in a mesopic environment, twilight-ish, especially indoors, artificially created by the dwelling, I don't necessarily need the light to see where I'm going because all I'm doing is navigating. So I'm looking from point A to point B. Now, when I start actually searching for things, I might need the light. But then you have to factor in, what am I actually searching for? The reason for the strobing method of light was to prevent a threat from being able to predict your movement or you telegraphing your location. You would light, get the data you need, and move. This kind of presupposes one of two things. The first thing being that the environment is so dark that I actually need the light, and of course the second thing being that the threat is in a position to vector your light based on your location in regards to his location. Because I don't know his location, my lighting technique needs to be as universal as possible because I can't suppose he's in this direction and use a lighting technique for moving in that direction. And that's where umbrella lighting really shines, no pun intended, but if you want it to be a pun, you can take it that way. That's why umbrella lighting is so good, because it is position neutral if used correctly. Of course, the next topic of conversation is the environment that I'm using my firearm in. Why am I there? If it's a general self-defense kind of situation, there's probably going to be some degree of ambient light present. The reason I say that is because the threat, unless they're using some kind of night vision aided device or they have a light of their own, is probably not in an area so dark that they're able to even see you to attack you for a profit or a personal crime. Of course, the exceptions to that would be you've been pursued into an area that has very, very low lighting. In a law enforcement setting, you're clearing a building because of an alarm or a burglar or a guy ran in there, things of that nature. Or in your home defense settings, how much ambient light is available to you in your house? Can someone move to a certain area of your house where they would be in what would consider be scotopic light, which means you'd have to use the light to illuminate and see. If you don't need the light to see what you're actually looking for, such as navigation, you shouldn't be using it. If you don't need the light to see your threat, you're only going to use it in regards to being able to control that threat, to remove their visual horizon. In that regard, the brighter the light, the better, because you're able to remove their visual horizon at a longer distance. The more lumens, more candela you have available to you, as long as you have a quality weapon light with a really good hot spot. So as you can see, the strobing technique, even when used in the umbrella fashion, is pretty straight simple. I'm going to orient the gun as position neutral as possible, which means I'm going to get it as straight up as I can. This is not temple index. This is more of a high port position with the handgun. I'm going to use the handgun in a method that I'm able to illuminate and reflect light off of a ceiling. Obviously, this technique is pretty much restricted to indoors. Outdoors, you'd have to use a baseboard lighting technique, which means I'm going to, as position neutral as possible, illuminate the floor. Now, one of the things that commonly comes up is using this technique, you do illuminate yourself, and you are absolutely correct. However, using a more light-directed forward technique, I'm only illuminating in the direction I'm looking. So I'm presupposing that by using this technique, and again, we're just talking about searching right now, we're not talking about confronting the threat. If I'm pointing my light to the north end of a room, and the threat is on the east or the west side, and I'm not aware of that, I'm also illuminating my position. I'm not doing anything different. All things considered, if you're not using light to control a threat, which means we're still talking about searching, so that's not even an issue at this point. No matter which way you point the light, you could potentially illuminate yourself to a threat who's concealed or who has eyes on you and you're not aware of their location yet. And of course, I use the word threat to also factor in unknowns as well. We may not know what we're dealing with. So the conversation about where you're going to illuminate your position. You're going to illuminate your position no matter when you turn the light on. In a searching fashion. When it comes to control, I'm able to remove my threat's visual horizon. He'll know where the light's at, so to speak. The brighter the light, the less he's able to actually pinpoint the hot spot of the light itself. All he's going to be able to visually see is white. And this is something you can obviously test for yourself on a friend in an environment that allows you to do that. Now, my personal feeling is weapon light is a luxury, but it's highly encouraged, whereas a handheld light is mandatory. There's no reason why you couldn't use the two in conjunction with each other as long as you have trained the skill set. Your hands can do separate things, even though they always want to be doing the exact same thing at the time. Is there value in that? It depends on how you look at it. Now, if I get a late ID on my threat, then I'm probably going to be relying strictly on the weapon light itself. And late ID means I was not prepared for the situation to occur. In a low light situation, I have to immediately go to the weapon light. If I already have my handheld out in mesopic or scotopic light, like I'm outdoors and it's night, or I'm indoors and it's dim or dark, then I should have my handheld ready to go anyway, and I'm going to use that to get myself to my weapon light. This is a reason why I like devices like the Theorem, or there's a bunch of other, it allows me to, a bunch of other devices. It allows me to retain my flashlight even when I transition to the weapon light, so I don't have to try to stow it in my pocket, which takes time, or drop it on the deck, which is something I don't want to do because I may still need that light. In fact, the way that I teach and the way that I do things with the weapon-mounted light, especially in the handgun, I do need that light because I'm going to use it to scan for additional threats or scan for additional data, even as I'm holding someone at gunpoint or after I've engaged a threat. One of the artificialities we get from low light classes, live fire low light classes, is the range is usually as dark as you can possibly get. And students are allowed to shoot in those extreme dark conditions because we spend so much time training and practicing, and maybe that's where our mind even goes, is worst case scenario, no illumination whatsoever besides what we bring to the table. We tend to develop some incorrect ideas about what we need to do when it comes to light. When it's time to engage a threat, when it's time to actually use the firearm or potential use for a firearm, high probability use for a firearm, I'm gonna just completely disregard those navigation techniques such as strobing. Reason being, I want constant light. If I'm trying to use my thumb to maintain control of my weapon light in a momentary only fashion, I am limiting my ability to shoot accurately, and I'm also going to complicate things when it comes to the moment I take the light off, do I lose data on my threat? If the environment has ambient light available to you, then you are going to be more benefited by maintaining constant light on your threat versus strobing, because it allows you to maintain that constant data even during a reload process or even doing moving to cover. There is value in turning that light off if you need to move, if their darkness is sufficient enough to provide you with concealment while you move. If the environment has decent ambient light, then you're actually doing yourself a disservice, because one, if you turn the light off, he's still going to be able to see you because there's sufficient ambient light to see a human figure. He may not be able to get fine detail because you were probably just pointing a very, very bright light in his face, but there's going to be enough ambient light for him to actually see where you're going. So you're not being sneaky. You can be seen. I've seen this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, just doing hundreds of evolutions under night vision and white light, doing force on force training. There's nothing sneaky about strobe in the face and then bail if there's enough ambient light in the room that you're working in to see without the aid of light at all. He may not, like I said, may not be able to get fine specific detail, but he's going to see the human figure. So if I maintain constant light as opposed to trying to use some kind of strobing technique, then I'm going to, at the very least, remove his visual horizon for the duration of the engagement. Obviously, if the confrontation occurs in an environment where there is no other sources of lighting, there is no ambient light, it is literally zero lume or as close to zero lume as you can possibly get, then there would be an advantage in turning your light off as you move. Of course, the question becomes, where are you moving to? Is it concealment or cover? Darkness is always going to be concealment if the darkness is sufficient enough to conceal a person. You have to get well outside of a city or deep inside of a structure with no lights whatsoever to get that type of lighting. It's not something that you commonly see outside of a structure where all the lights are turned off and there's no windows where ambient light's shining in, or you have to get out into a wilderness type setting or deep away from municipal lighting, cars, building signs, other things that provide ambient lighting that we see every day. So my technique is pretty straightforward, even on a late ID. But transitioning from that handheld, because my personal practice is anytime I'm in an environment where I feel like I'm going to need light or I feel like I might need light, my handheld is default. That allows me to get data and exhibit control if I need it. And then when the transition to the handgun comes, I'm just going to basically seamlessly roll that flashlight out of the way and activate my weapon light. I'm going to go down on the rocker. Me being left-handed with the Surefire, I can press in to get momentary, but if I go down on that rocker, I can then establish my traditional grip. I can roll the rocker against the inside of, or I should say the outside of my index finger to turn that light off anytime I want to. It does make me compromise my grip. However, that's momentary, and if I'm turning the light off, my grip isn't needed in that literally half a second it takes me to do that. With the TRL, with the Streamlight, it's really no different. In fact, because of the rocker design on the TRL, it actually works better for me as a left-handed shooter than it would for a right-handed shooter, up versus down. But as you can see, the technique here isn't much different. Why is constant on good? Hopefully by the point of this video you've kind of already see where I'm coming from, even if you don't necessarily agree with me. It's good because it's going to provide me with constant data. I can knowledgeably turn it off if I need to based on the environment, and it keeps me from having to compromise my shooting grip. One thing I've seen a lot is guys will try to run momentary only and end up turning the light constant on anyway. I see that with handheld weapon mounted lights. I also see it with literally just handheld lights as well. So develop a technique that you can knowledgeably control that constant light. Strobing is for navigation purposes only. I don't consider strobing to be something I'm going to use in a confrontation with a threat, because the light is what's giving me the advantage. If it's occurring in an environment where there is ambient lighting, turning the light off does nothing for me, and it doesn't hide me from the threat at all. As always, there are caveats to everything. There are exceptions to everything, things that we have to accept. That's why when it comes to weapon-mounted light techniques, we have to use them knowledgeably based on the environment that we're in. No one specific procedure is going to fit every single environment that you find or every single situation that you find yourself in. But there is a distinct advantage in using constant on versus momentary, especially when it comes time to shoot. It allows you to get your normal two-handed grip, which is going to help you improve your accuracy. In live fire classes, I see guys' accuracy suffer because they're not used to shooting while trying to maintain that momentary only grip on the gun, or I should say on the light source. So that's definitely something that we want to try to avoid, especially if you don't get a lot of time to practice low light shooting at all. The average person doesn't have access to a range that's going to allow them to practice in low light, so they literally have to go to a class to get it. So you're literally paying to practice something that you normally, just as avert to daytime shooting, you're able to practice daytime shooting in whatever way you can. Most people just can't get that nighttime. As always, trust but verify, or verify then trust and verify again. I encourage you to take something like a SIRT pistol, grab your weapon light, whatever it may be. As you know, my personal recommendations are either going to be Surefire or Streamlight. But whatever you happen to use, go ahead and test these. As to you, they're theories. To me, it's based on experience and repetition. Test these techniques out and see if they are beneficial. It's very beneficial for dry fire training to grab a friend and run your low light techniques against another human being in varied environments, varied low light conditions, to see what works and what doesn't. You may dispel a lot of those myths that are out there when it comes to low light control very, very quickly by just trying them in more realistic settings. Again, if it's a completely scotopic environment where there is no ambient light, then different techniques are going to apply. But most environments that you're going to see have some sort of ambient light present, and it definitely changes which techniques are actually superior over which ones don't necessarily work. And this goes back to that strobe always technique. Light on when I'm shooting, light off when I'm moving, and that makes a lot of sense if it's in an environment where without the light on, I can still get data to where I'm navigating to, and I can still get data on my threat and still get positive identification. If I'm in an environment where positive identification is not going to be a thing, or if I'm in an environment where I turn the light off, I lose all data for my surroundings, and that might not be a wise practice. And if I have close proximity with my threat, turning the light off may remove my ability to control that threat. And if there's enough ambient light, he can then deliver accurate gunfire or attack you in whatever way he was intending to attack you, because you remove your only source of data removal from him. I hope that addresses the topic specifically as well as I can when it comes to momentary only versus constant on with the weapon light on the handgun. In the future, I'm going to also address this on the rifle, because there are some specifics that are just slightly different, not too much different, but are slightly different when it comes to the weapon system on the rifle. But again, trust but verify. Definitely check these things out for yourself and see if they are going to work for you, and see if you can dispel some of those myths that you might have, some of those misconceptions that you may have based on technique, procedure, or when you should use this technique versus when you should use that technique. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.